This movie is about a family where everyone lives their daily lives according to a strict timetable. The husband, Don, is very simple, but his wife, Mona, is a psycho. The story shows how Mona's psychotic behavior affects the family and how far she goes with it. The family consists of a husband, wife, and their 2 children. Mona rules the household and has created a timetable for everything. Don follows whatever Mona says. Once Mona plans something, it has to happen exactly as she wants. Don has endured this for many years. Mona behaves the same way with her children. She wants them to win in everything and never even think about losing. Listening to Mona's words, Don becomes very worried, but he cannot say anything to her. He also doesn't have the courage to do anything. Whenever Don wants to get close to Mona, there is always a set time for it. Mona tells him that once she plans something, it has to happen accordingly. Don owns a furniture shop and spends most of his time there. However, Mona controls the shop because her father gave the money to set it up. Don is just like an employee at the shop, even though Mona claims that Don is the actual owner. One day, Don puts up an ad for an employee. A beautiful woman named Dusty comes to apply. The moment Don sees her, he falls in love. He hires her, hoping to start a relationship with her. Just then, Don's friend visits the shop. After seeing Dusty, the friend comments on how beautiful she is and talks about her with Don. He jokes, saying they need something to keep their minds fresh, considering how they spend their days working and listening to their wives. He suggests that hiring Dusty will bring fun to their boring routine and help them work better. In the next scene, a man is seen beating someone up. Afterward, he watches Don's interview on TV, where Don talks about his family. This man is actually a gang leader who robs rich people. After watching the interview, the gang leader instructs his men to follow Don. They continue to follow Don and his family, but Don has no idea about it. He spends time with his family and at his shop, unaware that he is being followed. These days, Don is mostly focused on Dusty, and he develops a romantic relationship with her. Dusty realizes that Don likes her. Later, when Mona tries to get close to Don at home, he refuses her because he is now happy with Dusty. Everything seems to be going Don's way. One day, there is a party at Don's house and Dusty also attends. During the party, she gives Don some bad news. She tells him that she is pregnant with his child. Don is shocked upon hearing this. He then begs Dusty to get an abortion or do something about it, asking her not to tell anyone. However, Dusty refuses and says she will keep the baby. Don realizes that his problems are only going to get worse. He goes to his friend's house and tells him everything. After listening to Don, his friend advises him to give Dusty some money and get rid of her. He warns Don that Dusty might blackmail him in the future, as she seems like the type of woman who could do that. Meanwhile, Dusty is seen going to meet someone. The man she meets is the same person who was earlier seen beating someone up and watching Don's interview on TV. It turns out that Dusty is also a member of his gang. The gang leader usually targets rich men and sends Dusty to manipulate them. Together, they fool the target and rob them. However, this time, the situation is different because Dusty has actually fallen for Don. The next day at the office, Don gives Dusty $13,000 and begs her to leave him alone, reminding her that he is a father of young children. Dusty starts crying and questions Don, asking if he really thinks she did all this for money. She tells him that she genuinely wants to be with him. However, she says if money is all he thinks she wants, then she will take the money and leave. Afterward, Dusty goes back to the gang leader and hands over the money. The leader gets furious, saying the amount is too little. He insults Dusty and orders her to get $25,000 more from Don. Following his orders, Dusty calls Don again and asks him for more money. Upon hearing this, Don realizes that his problems are only getting worse day by day. Don doesn't have that much money, so he thinks about telling Mona everything. However, he is scared of how Mona will react. Despite his fear, Don decides to confess everything to his wife. After hearing the whole story, Mona remains surprisingly calm. She takes a photo album and sits on the bed, showing no visible reaction. This makes Don even more afraid. Mona then calmly asks Don, "Do you still love that woman?" Don immediately replies, "No, I love only you, and I just want to be with you and our children." At this moment, Mona reveals her true nature. She tells Don that everything he has today, the luxury house, money, and status, is because of her. Without Mona, he wouldn't have any of it. Mona then instructs Don to call Dusty and ask her what she wants. Dawn calls Dusty, and she demands an additional $20,000. After the call, Mona tells Dawn that Dusty will never leave him alone. Mona says he now has only two options. He can either kill Dusty or give Mona a divorce. She warns Dawn that if he chooses a divorce, he will lose everything, including the right to see his children. Hearing this, Dawn is left in a dilemma. He doesn't want to kill Dusty, but Mona continues to pressure and trouble him. One day, Mona goes to Dawn's office and gives him some medicine. She tells him to mix it into Dusty's drink because she knows Dusty will come that night to collect the money from Dawn. Though Dawn is terrified, he takes the medicine and meets Dusty. As instructed, he mixes the medicine into her drink. After drinking it, Dusty loses consciousness and faints. Just then, Mona arrives. She tells Dawn to take Dusty to their house. Dawn, trembling with fear, carries Dusty home, knowing she is still unconscious. Dawn becomes increasingly anxious, fearing what Mona might do to Dusty. Upon reaching home, Mona tells Dawn to fetch a hammer. Dawn reluctantly brings it. Mona then orders him to hit Dusty on the head with the hammer to make her lose consciousness completely. Shocked, Dawn refuses, saying he can't do it. But Mona insists, saying, "You have to do it. After all, you are the one who had an affair with her." Despite her pressure, Dawn refuses to harm Dusty. Mona takes the hammer and hits Dusty hard on the head, killing her instantly. But even after this, Mona isn't satisfied. She drags Dusty's body to her garage. In a horrifying act of her psychotic behavior, Mona cuts Dusty's body into countless pieces. Watching this gruesome scene, Dawn vomits. He is terrified and shocked, unable to believe that his wife could do something so horrific. Days pass. Meanwhile, the gang leader becomes increasingly worried about Dusty since she hasn't shown up or contacted him for days. One day, while Dawn is at home, he looks outside and sees the gang leader talking to his son. Panicked, Dawn runs outside, but by the time he gets there, the gang leader is gone. However, he notices that the gang leader has handed his son a paper note. The note reads, "I want to meet you. I need to talk about Dusty." After reading the note, Dawn becomes extremely frightened, knowing that the gang leader won't leave him alone. He decides to meet him at a club. At the club, the gang leader questions Dawn about Dusty. Dawn lies and says that Dusty came to see him, took the money, and left. He claims he has no idea where she went afterward. After hearing this, the gang leader and his men speak badly about Dusty. The leader says Dusty is clever. As soon as she got the money, she showed her true colors. Then he demands that Dawn pay the money Dusty took since she disappeared without returning it. Shaken, Dawn returns home and tells Mona everything. Mona responds calmly, saying, "I told you, these people won't listen to words. Just watch what I'm going to do." She reveals her plan to plant Dusty's body at the gang leader's house. Mona believes that once the police find the body there, the gang leader will be accused of Dusty's murder, and they will be free from any trouble. Later, Mona sneaks into the gang leader's house and hides Dusty's body pieces in the freezer. While she is doing this, one of the gang members unexpectedly enters the house with a woman. Suspicious that someone is inside, the gang member becomes alert. Realizing that she might get caught, Mona grabs a knife from the kitchen. She stealthily attacks the gang member from behind, stabbing him. After the attack, Mona quickly escapes from the scene. However, the gang member survives the stabbing. Wounded and weak, he manages to call his leader and informs him about what happened. After Mona comes outside, she calls the police and reports that something suspicious is happening at the gang leader's house. The police head there immediately. A while later, the gang leader arrives home and finds the man Mona attacked now dead. Mona killed him before leaving. The gang leader is devastated. While trying to cope, he opens the fridge to grab a drink, only to find Dusty's dismembered body pieces inside. Horrified and confused, he panics. Just then, the police arrive and demand that the gang members come outside. One of the gang members refuses to surrender, knowing he will be arrested. He starts shooting at the police. In retaliation, the officers fire back, killing him on the spot. Meanwhile, the gang leader manages to escape through a hidden exit. In the next scene, Dawn is visibly upset. Unable to contain his emotions, he confronts Mona, asking, "How could you do all this? How did you manage to cut Dusty into pieces so easily? Weren't you scared at all?" Mona, however, behaves calmly, almost mockingly. She tells Dawn, "I'm perfectly fine. Stop asking me these questions." And if you ever ask me anything like this again, I'll do to you what I did to Dusty. It dawns on Don that he is trapped. He realizes that even if he wants to leave Mona, he can't, she will kill him. He is forced to spend the rest of his life with his psychotic wife. The next day, the police arrive at Don's house. The officer informs him, "We've caught the people who killed Dusty, but the gang leader is still on the run. We also heard that Dusty was one of your employees and used to visit your shop at night." Hearing this, Don panics. Desperate to avoid suspicion, he confesses to the officer, "I had an affair with her. But please, don't tell my wife about this." At that moment, Mona enters with the neighbor's dog, which had wandered into their house. She returns the dog to its owner, but coldly remarks, "If this dog comes into our house again, I'll cut it into pieces." The others laugh, assuming she's joking. Later, during Don's daughter's birthday party, everyone is enjoying the celebration. Don goes inside to get something from the fridge. When he opens it, he is shocked to find the neighbor's dog's dead body, brutally dismembered. Mona wasn't lying. She had actually killed the dog and cut it into pieces. Don is horrified. Meanwhile, outside at the party, the children are playing a game. Mona's son, however, keeps losing repeatedly. Seeing this, she harshly insults the parents of the child who wins. Don watches all of this in silence. Later, their daughter picks up a stick from her brother and behaves exactly how Mona wants her to, mimicking her aggressive behavior. Witnessing this, Don grows worried, fearing that Mona is turning their daughter into someone like her. This realization pushes Don to come up with a plan. He no longer wants to live with Mona. While everyone is outside, Don goes inside the house and deliberately manipulates the electrical wires to create a short circuit when someone turns on the lights. He also opens the gas cylinder, ensuring that when the light switch is flipped, it will cause a massive explosion. After finishing his setup, Don calmly walks back outside. He then calls Mona and asks her to get him something to eat from the fridge. As Mona heads inside, Don waits outside, knowing what's about to happen. The moment Mona switches on the light, a powerful explosion occurs. She dies instantly. Everything goes as Don planned. A few days pass. In the next scene, Don is seen living happily in a luxurious house with his children. The leader, who has now learned the truth about Dusty's murder, follows Don on a motorcycle, closing the story on a dark and unsettling note. Thank you for watching our movie recap. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing for more great content. Your support means a lot to us. Have a wonderful day.